Clara Thompson woke before dawn on the first day of November 1985, the way she had for 41 years of marriage, reaching across the bed for Samuel's warmth and finding only cold sheets. She lay still, listening to the house breathe around her. The radiator clanked once, then settled. Outside, the last leaves scraped against the window like fingernails trying to get in. She was 62 years old and, for the first time in her adult life, completely alone. She rose, slipped her feet into the slippers Samuel had worn thin, and padded to the kitchen. The coffee pot hissed. She poured 1 cup instead of 2. The silence pressed against her eardrums so hard she thought they might burst. She carried the cup to the table and sat in Samuel's chair. The vinyl seat was cracked in the exact place where his weight had settled every morning for decades. She set the cup down untouched and rested her forehead on the cool formica. That was when the first sob tore out of her, raw and animal, surprising them both, her and the empty house. Samuel had died on October 14th, 21 days ago. It felt both like yesterday and like 1,000 years. She still expected him to walk through the back door at any moment, wiping grease from his hands with a red rag, calling out, "Clara girl, you saving me any supper?" She still laid 2 forks on the table some nights before catching herself. She still whispered, "Good night, love," into the dark on her side of the bed. The funeral had been decent. The church ladies brought ham and 7 kinds of Jell-O salad. The pastor said nice things. Emily cried prettily into a lace handkerchief she'd bought for the occasion. Jack stood stiff in his city suit, jaw clenched so tight Clara worried he'd crack a tooth. Neighbors shook her hand and told her Samuel was in a better place. She wanted to scream that the better place for him was right here, fixing the carburetor on Mrs. Henderson's Buick or humming off-key while he mowed the lawn in perfect stripes. After everyone left, she locked the door, drew every curtain, and did not come out for 11 days. On the 12th day, a knock rattled the front door hard enough to make her heart lurch. She ignored it. The knocking came again, insistent. She crept to the window and peered through a crack in the drapes. Tommy Wilkins, 16, all elbows and freckles, stood on the porch holding a casserole dish wrapped in a tea towel. His mother's doing, no doubt. Clara almost turned away, but something in the boy's face stopped her. He looked scared, not of her, of failing at the task he'd been sent to do. She opened the door a hand's breadth. Tommy stared at the offering. Tuna casserole, the smell of cream of mushroom soup drifted up and turned her stomach. "Thank you, Tommy. Tell your mother I said so." She started to close the door. "Mrs. Thompson?" His voice cracked. "Dad says your Buick's been sitting since Mr. Thompson. Anyway, the tires will go flat if somebody doesn't start it up once in a while." She looked past him to the driveway where her 1974 Buick LeSabre sat under a dusting of leaves, looking as abandoned as she felt. "I'll manage," she said. Tommy shifted his weight. "I mean, if you want, Mr. Thompson showed me how to gap spark plugs last summer. I'm pretty good." Something flickered in Clara's chest. Memory, pain, gratitude, all tangled together. "Come back tomorrow after school," she heard herself say. "We'll see what you remember." She shut the door before he could answer. That night, she ate 3 bites of tuna casserole and threw the rest in the garbage. Then she climbed the attic stairs for the first time since Samuel's death. In the far corner, beneath a stack of Christmas decorations, sat the shoebox. She had forgotten it was there. Samuel had labeled it in his blocky handwriting, "Clara, do not throw away." Inside were letters, hundreds of them, some in envelopes, some folded loose. The oldest was dated June 12, 1960. The night he'd first kissed her behind the Ferris wheel at the county fair. "My hands are shaking so hard I can barely write," it began. "I keep tasting the cotton candy on your lips. I think I'm done for, Clara May. You've ruined me for any other girl, and I couldn't be happier about it." She read until the flashlight batteries died, tears dripping onto the paper and blurring the ink. The next afternoon, Tommy showed up with a socket set and an earnest expression. Together, they pushed the Buick out of the carport. He checked the oil, the belts, the battery cables with the reverence of a priest handling relics. When the engine finally coughed to life, he whooped so loud the crows scattered from the maple tree. Clara felt something shift inside her, like a dislocated bone sliding back into place. Small, painful, but necessary. Winter came early that year. The river froze. The sky stayed the color of a bruise. Clara began leaving the house again, if only to sit on the porch wrapped in Samuel's old Carhartt coat while Tommy shoveled the walk. She started answering the phone when Emily called. She even baked, first a lopsided apple pie that collapsed in the middle, then sugar cookies cut into stars. She left a plate on the Wilkins porch with a note, "Thank you for lending me your boy." In January, she found the courage to open Samuel's workshop. The air was thick with the ghost of gasoline and Old Spice. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. Half-disassembled lawnmower on the bench, coffee mug with a chipped handle, radio tuned forever to the classic country station. On the pegboard hung the red rag he'd used the morning he died. Clara pressed it to her face and inhaled what little was left of him. She stayed until her fingers went numb from cold. Then she took down his spare set of coveralls, folded them neatly, and hung them on a hook by the door where they could wait for Tommy. Spring arrived sideways, with freezing rain that turned to sunshine overnight. Daffodils pushed up through the mud like they had somewhere important to be. Clara planted the garden the way Samuel always had. Tomatoes in the sunniest corner, zucchini because it made him laugh how one plant could feed half the county, roses along the fence, peace roses, creamy white with pink edges, the kind they'd carried at their wedding. She was on her knees pulling weeds when Harold Grayson walked past with his dog, a portly golden retriever named Mabel. Harold was 70, tall and thin, with a kind eyes and a limp from an old war injury. His wife, Ruth, had died of breast cancer 3 years earlier. Everyone in Eldridge knew that Harold still set 2 places at his table out of habit. "Morning, Clara," he called over the fence. She sat back on her heels, wiping dirt from her hands. "Morning, Harold." He smiled, and something in his face reminded her of Samuel when he was about to tell a joke. "Mabel and I have all the time in the world." They sat on the porch steps drinking lemonade from jelly jars. Mabel flopped down with a sigh that sounded like mutual agreement. Harold talked about Ruth, how she'd loved bird watching, how she'd left feeders in every tree and could name every warbler by song. Clara found herself telling him about the letters in the shoebox. She hadn't meant to. The words simply spilled out. "I write back sometimes," she admitted, cheeks burning. "I know it's foolish." Harold shook his head. "Ruth kept a journal. After she passed, I read it cover to cover. Then I started writing in the blank pages at the back. Like conversations. It's the only thing that keeps me sane some nights." They sat in silence after that, the comfortable kind that doesn't need filling. Harold became a regular visitor. He brought soup when Clara caught a cold. She brought him tomatoes when his own plants failed. They took to walking Mabel together in the evenings, down by the river where the willows trailed their fingers in the current. One night in late August, fireflies blinking like slow Christmas lights, Harold reached for her hand. Clara let him take it. His palm was warm, calloused in different places than Samuel's had been. She waited for guilt to rise up and choke her. It tried, but it was tired, and her heart was stronger now. Autumn again. The first anniversary of Samuel's death loomed like a black cloud on the horizon. Clara woke every morning with a stone in her chest. She lost weight she didn't have to lose. Her hands shook when she poured coffee. Emily came home for a long weekend and found her mother sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing, tears cutting silent tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Mom, talk to me," Emily begged. Clara couldn't. The words were locked behind her teeth. On October 13th, she drove to the cemetery alone. The sky was iron gray, the wind sharp enough to cut. She knelt by the headstone, Samuel James Thompson, beloved husband and father, and laid the latest letter on the grass. In it, she had written everything: how much she missed him, how afraid she was of forgetting the sound of his voice, how Harold's kindness felt like both gift and betrayal, how sometimes she woke reaching for him and hated herself for the warmth she found on the other side of the bed when Harold stayed over. She stayed until her knees ached and the cold seeped into her bones. When she stood, Harold was there, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee from the thermos he kept in his truck. He didn't say anything, just handed her a cup and stood beside her while she cried herself empty. That night, the whole town seemed to hold its breath. Clara hosted a gathering, not a party, never that, but a remembering. The living room filled with neighbors, with Jack and his new girlfriend, with Emily heavy with the grandchild Clara hadn't dared hope for. Tommy brought his parents. Someone started a fire in the fireplace. Someone else put Patsy Cline on the record player. Stories poured out like honey. Samuel giving away a transmission job because the customer was a single mom. Samuel dancing with Clara in the kitchen to a commercial jingle. Samuel falling asleep in his recliner with little Emily curled on his chest like a kitten. At midnight, Clara stood on the porch, wrapped in Samuel's old coat, watching the stars. Harold came up behind her and rested his hands on her shoulders. "He'd want you happy," he said quietly. "I know," she whispered. "That's what makes it so hard." The second year was gentler. Clara turned 64. Her hair went from silver-streaked to fully white, but her eyes regained their spark. She taught knitting classes at the senior center on Tuesdays. On Thursdays, she and Harold delivered Meals on Wheels. Little Clara, named for her grandmother, was born in March, red-faced and furious, with Samuel's chin and Emily's lungs. Holding that tiny, furious bundle, Clara felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been frozen solid. She kept writing letters, some to Samuel, some now to Ruth as well, 2 old friends gossiping across the veil. She told them about the first time Harold kissed her, soft, tentative, tasting of coffee and hesitation, about watching her granddaughter discover her own toes, about the way grief sneaks up on you in the grocery store when you reach for 2 potatoes out of habit and realize you only need 1. On quiet evenings, she and Harold sat on the porch swing Samuel had built the summer Jack graduated high school. The chains creaked the same familiar rhythm. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply held hands and listened to the river. One October morning, exactly 5 years after Samuel's death, Clara woke to find Harold already up, making coffee. He was 75 now, thinner, his limp more pronounced, but his eyes still kind. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a small wooden box. Inside was a single peace rose, pressed flat between sheets of wax paper, and a letter in Harold's careful handwriting. "Clara," it began, "5 years ago I stood in a cemetery and watched the strongest woman I've ever known say goodbye to the love of her life. I didn't know then that I'd be lucky enough to walk the next part of her road with her. I don't replace Samuel, nobody could, but I hope I've earned the privilege of holding your hand while you carry him with you. Thank you for letting me love you. Thank you for loving me back, scars and all. Yours, always, Harold." Clara read it twice. Then she walked out to the garden where the roses still bloomed defiantly against the coming frost. She laid the pressed flower at the base of the tallest bush, the one Samuel had planted the year they paid off the mortgage. "I kept my promise," she whispered to the wind, to the river, to the man who lived in her bones. Behind her, the screen door creaked. Harold stepped out carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and slipped an arm around her waist. Together, they stood in the crisp morning light, 2 widows who had somehow, against all odds, found their way back to the land of the living. Inside Clara's heart, Samuel smiled.